Well, I have a good friend, Andrew Mills. He gives me a phone call while I'm working on a job in Como and says, I've got this really unusual project. There's a guy by the name of Nigel Oakey who heads up Dome, and they've bought an old train carriage. Are you interested in having a look at it? And we had a look through this wreck. That is the best way to describe it. It was graffitied, there were doors cut in the side of it, there were holes in the roof, there was pigeon poo and leaves and you name it. It was just an abomination. And the more I looked at it, the more excited I got, because you could see the potential of this carriage, of what it used to be, what we saw in the museum, and what it had become. The carriage is going to be a part of the Dome Cafe in Bassendean, by 1/3 of it being inside the cafe itself, and then 2/3 of it projecting through a glass wall outside of the cafe on like a big suspended slab, about 4 metres up in the air. And you'll be able to take your food on, sit in one of the booths that have been refurbished, and pretend like you're dining on a carriage. The undertaking of renovating or restoring the train carriage was a massive job, and there were quite a few people involved. So I had a good friend of mine, Phil Caffarella, come involved with it. He had good metalwork skills and worked tirelessly with me for the next 4 weeks doing it. We had a painting team with John Herbert, and he had 2 other painters that worked closely with him, and they did all the painting of the outside of the carriage. And then I had a good friend of mine, Andrew Mills, who first referred me to the project. He had really good skills in just sanding up the exterior paintwork and renovating all the hardware, the locks and the window catches and that sort of thing. So there was a team of us. For the first week we were just stripping it off. So taking off all the masonite sheeting that had been put in back in the 50s, and then finding what the bones of it were like, because we didn't really know what we had. It had been parked outside for 15 years at the museum, and in that time it had taken all the weather. There'd been no covering and no protection for it, so we had a lot of rot down the inside wall and across the floor, and I guess one end of the platform, which was totally rotted out. I could go on for about another half an hour of the things we discovered while we were pulling it apart, and through every part of that we had then come up with a solution. This is the complete service history that was discovered in Forestfield only 4 weeks into doing the carriage. So this had been lost for many, many years. On the 22nd of February 1908 was purchased for the cost of £2,884 by the West Australian Railway Works, and it is cart number AR, which is a passenger car, number 348. And you can see it first went on traffic on the 22nd of February 1908. And every time they spent money on it or took it into repairs, they put a log here, an entry in the log. And you see 48 years it was in continuous service until in October 1955, 48 years later, it was actually converted. This was a sit-up passenger car, and then it was changed into what they call an RAS or an ARS, which is an AR sleeper. So when you visit the carriage, you see there's hooks from the roof all the way along. And the idea was then they lifted the backrest up and it became a sleeper, a bunk. So they would sleep 4 people in every compartment. And then for the next 19 years, it was used as a sleeper between Perth and Kalgoorlie and Perth and Albany and up to Geraldton and so on. And then in 1965, so 19 years later, they changed it and they poured it into the workshops. It repainted to cream and green. And then they used it for another 15 years until the last entry here reads it was written off on the 19th of December 1975. So that was when it finished its life as a service car. Then we see the next entry here, which is in 1979, 4 years later, converted by Chief Civil Engineer Branch and written back as VW348. VW means a van for works, or a workman's van, a donger on wheels basically. So it was shunted out, it says here, to be used in Geraldton district. It was shunted out to Geraldton, it was left on the side of a railway line, and the workmen who were working the railways would use it as accommodation every night. A year after being up in Geraldton, they decided that it was a bit hard living up there without air conditioners, so it was bought back in August 1980, and air conditioning installed at Forestfield. And then for the next 15 years it was up in Geraldton, until in 1995, it says here, cut up. That's when it was cut up. They said, but it wasn't. It was actually sold to the Railway Heritage Museum. So it sat there from 95 until 2014, which is when it was bought by Dome Cafe. And we can see here that the last entry that they allowed Dome to write in was faithfully restored at Bassendean Railway Museum to exacting standards of the original ARS carriage works, Works completed under intensive 8-week period with great care and passion, led by Mr. Simon de Serville, leading hand Mr. Phil Caffarella, master painter John Herbert, and restored carriage bound for fresh service as a dining car in a new Dome Cafe in Bassendean. So it went from a passenger car to a sleeper car to a workman's van, and now it's going to be a dining car.